absolute, bone-chilling silence of a Siberian winter. The air does not just bite, it preserves. High in the Altai Mountains, where the borders of Russia, China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan converge in a jagged embrace of granite and ice, there is a mouth in the earth known as the Denisova cave. For 300,000 years, this limestone hollow has breathed in the cold and exhaled the dust of passing eras. In 2008, a Russian archaeologist working in the soft, chocolate-colored silt of the cave's 11th layer felt his trowel click against something small. It was not a grand skull or a ceremonial sword. It was a fragment of a pinky bone, a distal phalanx so tiny and unremarkable that it could have been mistaken for a pebble or a discarded scrap of animal remains. This sliver of calcium, no larger than a chickpea, belonged to a young girl who died nearly 50 millennia ago. Yet, when the light of modern sequencing hit its ancient marrow, it didn't just illuminate her life, it shattered every map we had drawn of the human story. What if I told you that the standard history of our species, the neat, linear progression of Homo sapiens emerging from Africa to find an empty world, is fundamentally a myth? For most of our existence, we were not the only version of humanity walking this earth. We shared the forests, the plains, and the high mountain passes with at least 2 other distinct human species, and perhaps more, all of them thinking, dreaming, and mourning, just as we do. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly what this is for. So get comfortable, maybe subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing Tokyo at dawn, London at midnight, all experiencing the same mystery together. The dust in the Denisova cave is not merely dirt. It is a pressurized record of time. To stand at the entrance of the cave is to look into a dark, yawning throat that has swallowed the seasons of the Pleistocene. Outside, the Anhui River snakes through the valley, a silver thread against the dark green of the taiga. Inside, the temperature remains a constant, frigid 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, creating a natural vault where organic matter resists the urge to decay. This sub-zero stillness is the reason the pinky bone survived. In any other climate, the humid jungles of Java or the acidic soils of Europe, the delicate strands of DNA inside that bone would have unraveled and vanished long ago. Instead, they remained coiled like a dormant clock, waiting for the technology of the 21st century to wake them up. When that fragment arrived at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, the scientists there didn't expect a revolution. They expected to find a Neanderthal. At the time, we believed the world of 40,000 years ago was a simple binary. The rugged, cold-adapted Neanderthals in the West, and the slender, inventive Homo sapiens in the East. The extraction process was a delicate ritual of destruction. A tiny portion of the bone was drilled away, reduced to a fine white powder, and treated with chemicals to release the genetic ghosts trapped within. When the first results of the mitochondrial DNA came back, the lead researcher, Svante Pääbo, looked at the data in a state of quiet disbelief. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down only from the mother, creating a direct maternal lineage that acts as a biological lighthouse through time. A typical modern human differs from a Neanderthal at about 202 nucleotide positions. This mystery girl from the cave, however, differed from us at nearly 385 positions. She was not a sapiens, And she was not a Neanderthal. She was something else entirely, a third lineage of humanity that had branched off from our common ancestors nearly 1,000,000 years ago. She was the first evidence of the ghost tribe, a people we now call the Denisovans. In the sterile white light of the laboratory, the realization began to sink in that the out-of-Africa narrative was far more crowded than we had dared to imagine. We are used to being the only humans on the planet. We look at the great apes, the chimps, the bonobos, the gorillas, and we see a vast evolutionary chasm between us and them. But 40,000 years ago, that chasm was bridged by others who were nearly us, but not quite. Imagine a world where, if you traveled far enough east, you would encounter people with different brow ridges, different ways of speaking, and different ways of seeing the stars, yet who were close enough to share a meal or a family. The discovery of this girl, whom the scientists nicknamed X-Woman, proved that the Earth was once a multi-species stage. The Altai Mountains were a grand crossroads, a place where the western range of the Neanderthals overlapped with the eastern expansion of these mysterious Denisovans, while our own ancestors were beginning to move through the gaps between them. The scale of this realization is difficult to grasp from our modern perspective. We think of human as a singular noun, but for the vast majority of our history, it was a plural category. The pinky bone, as small as it was, acted as a key that unlocked a door to a world of shadows. We had no teeth, no limbs, and no tools that we could definitively say belonged to this group at the time. We had only their code. It is a strange, modern haunting to know a people exists not because we found their cities or their graves, but because we found their digital signature in a grain of dust. This girl, who likely died in her early childhood, became the most important ghost in the history of science. She represents a lineage that survived for hundreds of thousands of years, braving ice ages and volcanic winters, only to disappear so completely that her entire existence was forgotten for 40 millennia. As we look closer at the genetics, the mystery deepens into something more intimate. This wasn't just a separate species living in isolation. The DNA tells a story of profound connection. When the full nuclear genome was sequenced, the scientists found that the Denisovans weren't just a footnote in history. They were ancestors. Their DNA didn't just stay in that Siberian cave. It traveled, it flowed through the generations, crossing mountains and oceans, finding its way into the blood of people living today in Melanesia, Australia, and across East Asia. The ghost tribe is not truly gone. They are a part of the living fabric of the modern world. Every time a person in the high Himalayas breathes easily in the thin air, or a person in the Pacific Islands fights off a specific tropical virus, they are using tools that were forged in the bodies of the Denisovans. The Altai Mountains tonight are likely as cold and indifferent as they were when that young girl lost her life. The wind still howls through the limestone galleries of the cave, carrying with it the scent of ancient snow and the silence of the deep past. It is a humbling thought to realize that our modern civilization, with all its steel and silicon, is built upon a foundation of such profound loss. We are the survivors of a much larger family, the last ones left in a house that used to be full of voices. We often think of history as a solid thing, a series of dates and battles etched in stone. But the story of the Denisovans reminds us that history is actually a fragile thread, easily broken and under a few inches of dirt. The tiny phalanx of the ex-woman sits now in a museum, a fragment of a person who never knew she would be the one to tell the world about her people. She was likely a child of about 5 or 7 years old. We can only wonder if she had a favorite spot in the cave to watch the sun set over the Anhui River, or if she shivered against the same drafts that archaeologists feel today. In the grand, cosmic scale of time, her life was a mere spark, yet her biological legacy is a bonfire that has rewritten the origin story of every person on this planet. We are not a pure lineage. We are a mosaic, a tapestry of ghosts, woven together by prehistoric encounters in the dark. As the light fades from the Siberian sky and the shadows lengthen across the valley floor, the distinction between us and them begins to blur. We are all made of the same stardust and the same ancient earth, carrying the fragments of civilizations that existed before the first word was ever written. The discovery in the Denisova cave was not just a find for biology. It was a lesson in humility. It taught us that the world is always older and more complex than our current maps allow. We are walking on layers of memory, stepping over the bones of brothers and sisters whose names we will never know, but whose essence remains part of the very rhythm of our hearts. The silence of the cave is a heavy, velvet weight, a reminder that time does not move in a straight line, but in circles, folding back on itself until the past and the present are indistinguishable. We are children of the ice and the sun, carrying the secrets of the Altai in our very cells. The girl with the pinky bone was just the beginning, a single syllable in a long forgotten poem that we are only now starting to read. History is often described as a book, but perhaps it is more like the air in a deep cavern, invisible yet filling every corner of our existence, waiting for a moment of stillness for us to truly feel its presence against our skin. The Altai Mountains do not merely sit upon the earth. They seem to hold it together, a knot of jagged peaks and deep, verdant valleys where the wind speaks in a language of ancient ice. To understand the Denisovans, one must first understand the cathedral of stone they called home for nearly 300 millennia. The Denisova cave is not a grand, sprawling cavern of stalactites and underground rivers. It is a modest limestone shelter, a series of 3 chambers, the main, east, and south, that look out over the Anhui River like a watchful eye. But what makes this place a sanctuary of the past is its peculiar geological chemistry. While the world outside swung violently between the blistering heat of interglacial periods and the suffocating grip of the Great Frost, the interior of the cave remained a constant thermal anchor. It is a natural refrigerator, a vaulted deep freeze where the passage of time is not measured in years, but in the slow, rhythmic accumulation of dust, bone, and breath. Imagine standing at the mouth of the cave as a traveler might have 100,000 years ago. The air is sharp with the scent of wild thyme and the musk of cave hyenas. Below, the river is a churning ribbon of meltwater, carving its way through the valley floor. To enter the cave is to step out of the frantic pace of the biological world and into a realm of mineral stillness. The floor beneath your feet is a stratigraphic masterpiece, a vertical timeline where every inch of soil represents thousands of years of human struggle and survival. Archaeologists call this the layer cake of time. Each stratum is a distinct color, a distinct texture. Dark browns from decaying organic matter, pale ash of fires that were extinguished before the first pyramids were ever conceived. In the silence of these chambers, the geological record reveals a startling truth. This cave was the ultimate prehistoric intersection. For hundreds of thousands of years, it was a piece of prime real estate in the middle of a vast, unforgiving wilderness. But the inhabitants were not always the same. As the climate shifted, so did the tenants. When the glaciers expanded and the Siberian tundra became a wasteland of permafrost, the Neanderthals, stocky, barrel-chested, and built for the cold, would migrate from the west, seeking the shelter of the Altai. When the world warmed and the forests crept back up the mountainsides, the Denisovans would return from the east, and eventually a third group, our own ancestors, Homo sapiens, would arrive, carrying their own tools and their own stories. There is a profound, almost melancholic irony in the way these three human lineages use the cave. For much of history, they may have missed each other by only a few centuries, a mere heartbeat in geological time. A Neanderthal family might have huddled around a hearth in the main chamber, unaware that beneath the very dirt they slept on lay the discarded stone tools of a Denisovan hunter who had occupied the same spot 10,000 years earlier. They were like ghosts, haunting the same house across different rooms of time. They walked the same paths to the river. They watched the same constellations wheel across the Siberian sky. They sought the same protection from the mountain storms. The cave was a shared inheritance, a common ground that bound these three distinct versions of humanity together, long before their DNA would eventually mingle. The preservation within the Denisova cave is so extraordinary that it extends beyond bones to the very air and soil itself. In recent years, scientists have developed the ability to extract environmental DNA directly from the dirt of the cave floor, even in layers where no fossils were found. The sediment holds the genetic echoes of those who lived there. It is as if the cave remembered them. By washing the silt and analyzing the microscopic fragments of skin, sweat, and waste left behind, researchers have been able to map the changing demographics of the cave over 300,000 years. They found that the Denisovans were the original masters of this sanctuary, arriving long before anyone else. They were the mountain people, adapted to the high altitudes and the fluctuating extremes of the Altai, long before the Neanderthals ever ventured this far east. To look at a cross-section of the cave's soil is to witness a slow-motion dance of extinction and endurance. In the lower layers, the Denisovan signal is strong and solitary. Then, roughly 150,000 years ago, the first Neanderthal genetic signatures begin to appear, flickering in and out like a dying candle. As we move upward through the layers toward the present, the signals begin to overlap. This is where the story shifts, from a simple history of occupation to a complex narrative of intimacy. We find evidence of hybrid individuals, children born of the union between these groups. The cave was not just a shelter. It was a melting pot. It was a place where the rigid boundaries we draw today between species were blurred by the simple human needs for warmth, companionship, and survival. The Altai Mountains provided the perfect stage for this encounter because they sit at a biological crossroads. To the north lies the endless Siberian taiga. To the south, the arid steppes of Central Asia. To the west, the European forests. And to the east, the vastness of East Asia. The Denisova cave was the center of this compass. It was a lighthouse in a sea of migration. When we analyze the stone tools found in the various layers, we see a fascinating evolution of technology. The Denisovans were not primitive in the way we often imagine. They were innovators, crafting delicate stone blades and bone needles that suggest a level of craftsmanship and aesthetic sense that rivals anything produced by early Homo sapiens. They weren't just surviving in the cave. They were living in it, decorating their lives and refining their culture over thousands of generations. There's a stillness that settles over you when you contemplate the sheer longevity of this occupation. Our modern recorded history, from the invention of writing to the landing on the moon, spans roughly 5,000 years. That is a single, thin line of dust in the Denisova cave. The Denisovans lived in and around these mountains for 60 times that length of time. They saw the landscape change from lush grasslands filled with woolly mammoths and cave lions to frozen deserts of ice, and back again. They were a stable, enduring presence in a world of constant flux. The cave was their fortress, a constant in a world where the very shape of the continents was shifting. The natural refrigeration of the cave did more than just preserve DNA. It preserved a sense of presence. When you look at the smooth, polished walls of the interior, worn down by the shoulders of countless generations passing through the narrow openings, you feel the weight of that continuity. The Denisovans were not a failed species that went extinct. They were a successful one that endured for a staggering amount of time. They were the pioneers of the East, the first humans to truly master the rugged heart of Asia. And while they may have eventually faded from the fossil record, the sanctuary of Altai ensured that they would not fade from our memory. As we move through the middle layers of the cave, we see the climate beginning to stabilize into the world we might recognize today. The megafauna begin to vanish, and the forest begins to reclaim the slopes. But the Denisovans are still there, their presence recorded in the ever-deepening layers of silt. They are the silent witnesses to the arrival of the first modern humans, the Homo sapiens, who would eventually become the sole inheritors of the earth. In those overlapping layers of dirt, we find the evidence of a world that was shared, a world where 3 different kinds of humans looked out from the same cave entrance at the same rising sun, each wondering in their own way about the mysteries of the valley below. The geological silence of the Altai is a reminder that we are all temporary residents of this planet. The cave has outlived the Denisovans, it has outlived the Neanderthals, and it will likely outlive us. It stands as a monument to the endurance of life and the fragility of identity. We find ourselves searching its depths, not just for scientific data, but for a reflection of ourselves, to see how we fit into this long, winding lineage of seekers who found comfort in the dark, cold embrace of the mountain. The dust continues to settle in the Denisova cave, a slow, invisible rain that adds a new, microscopic layer every year. It is a process that never stops, a continuous recording of the planet's pulse. In this quiet, frozen archive, the story of the ghost tribe remains etched in the chemistry of the earth, a testament to a time when the world was larger, stranger, and far more connected than we ever dared to dream. The mountain does not care about the names we give to the bones it holds. It only knows the rhythm of the seasons and the weight of the stone. And in that indifference, there is a kind of peace, a sense that even when we are gone, the record of our existence will remain, cradled in the cold, dark silence of the Altai. In the realm of archaeology, we are accustomed to the tangible. We look for the heavy footprint of empire, the crumbling limestone of the Parthenon, the silent terracotta armies of China, or the obsidian arrowheads scattered across the American Great Plains. We define the past by what we can touch, measure, and place behind glass. But the Denisovans defy this physical tradition. They are the first civilization in human history to be discovered not by the spade, but by the algorithm. In the cold, analytical language of population genetics, they are known as a ghost population. This term carries a haunting precision. It describes a group of people who are statistically certain to have existed, whose migrations and matings are etched into the data, yet who have left behind no cities, no graveyards, and, until very recently, no recognizable face. They are an architecture of shadow, a people built entirely out of the mathematical gaps in our own DNA. To visualize a ghost population, one must look past the bone and into the code. When geneticists sequence the genome of a modern human, they aren't just looking at an individual. They are looking at a palimpsest, a parchment that has been written over, erased, and rewritten for 1,000,000 years. By comparing the DNA of modern populations from across the globe, scientists began to notice archaic pulses, sequences of base pairs that didn't match the standard Homo sapiens blueprint, nor did they match the Neanderthal genome. It was a statistical anomaly, a recurring echo that grew louder as the samples moved toward East Asia and the Pacific. It was as if we were looking at a family photograph and seeing a blurred, unrecognizable figure in the background of every shot. We could see the effect they had on the family, a shared eye color here, a specific height there, but the person themselves remained a smudge on the lens. There is a unique kind of scientific frustration in this search. For over a decade following the initial discovery in the Altai Mountains, the entire physical record of the Denisovans could fit inside a small matchbox. A few molars, a fragment of a finger bone, and a sliver of a skullcap. To an anthropologist, a skull is a biography. It tells you about the strength of the jaw, the size of the brain, the harshness of the diet, and the shape of the brow. Without a skull, the Denisovans remained a disembodied intelligence. We knew they were sophisticated. We knew they traveled thousands of miles. We knew they interbred with our ancestors, but we could not look them in the eye. This absence created a void that was filled by the cold, objective beauty of bioinformatics. We had to build their face out of percentages and probability curves, reconstructing a lost branch of humanity, using nothing but the digital echoes they left behind in the blood of billions of living people. The beauty of this digital architecture is its honesty. Bones can be moved by floods. They can be mislabeled by collectors. They can be weathered beyond recognition. But the genetic record is a high-fidelity recording of every encounter that resulted in a child. In the genomes of the Han Chinese, the Japanese, the Sherpas of the Himalayas, and the indigenous peoples of the Philippines and Australia, the Denisovan signal is not just a trace, it is a functional legacy. We are searching for a ghost by examining the shape of the room it left behind. We see their presence in the way modern humans survive at extreme altitudes, or how our bodies recognize certain pathogens. The architecture of the Denisovan ghost is not made of stone, but of biological utility. They didn't leave us monuments. They left us the tools for our own survival. This shift in perspective, from the macro scale of ruins to the micro scale of molecules, represents a paradigm shift in how we understand our own identity. We are used to thinking of species as distinct boxes, separated by clear boundaries. But the math of the ghost population reveals a much more fluid reality. The Denisovans were not a separate room in the house of humanity. They were a hallway that we walked through. They blended into us so thoroughly that they became invisible to the naked eye, disappearing into the vast, churning sea of the human gene pool. Finding them requires us to abandon our reliance on the visual and embrace the abstract. It is the ultimate exercise in historical imagination, to feel the weight of a people who exist only as a series of A, C, G, and T markers on a computer screen. The frustration of the empty pedestal, the missing skull, began to lift slightly in 2019, when a new technique called protein analysis identified a jawbone found in a cave on the Tibetan plateau as Denisovan. It was a moment of profound clarity. For the first time, we had a piece of the ghost's anatomy found outside of Siberia. The jaw was robust, lacking a chin, with massive teeth that suggested a diet of tough, high-altitude vegetation. It was a physical anchor for the mathematical ghost. Yet, even with this discovery, the Denisovans remain elusive. We still don't know what their skin looked like, how they styled their hair, or if they wore clothes of fur or woven fiber. We are still painting a visual novel in the dark, using the light of science to catch fleeting glimpses of a profile that refuses to stay in focus. There is a melancholic grace in being a ghost population, to be remembered not by the ego of empires, not by statues that crumble or names that are forgotten, but by the very chemical composition of the people who came after you. In a way, the Denisovans achieved a form of immortality that no pharaoh could ever touch. They are woven into the heartbeat of the modern world. When a child is born in the Solomon Islands with a specific genetic resistance to a local fever, the ghost is there. When a nomad in the Altai Mountains braves a blizzard that would kill a person from the tropics, the ghost is there. Their architecture is living, breathing, and evolving. They are the silent partners in our global success story, the invisible architects of the modern human body. As we move through the data, the scale of their influence becomes staggering. Mathematics tells us that there wasn't just one type of Denisovan. The genetic diversity within their ghost signature suggests they were as varied as modern Europeans and East Asians are today. There were northern branches and southern branches, groups that adapted to the sub-zero plateaus, and groups that thrived in the sweltering rainforests of Sunderland. The architecture of this ghost population is not a single structure, but a vast, sprawling network of adaptation that once covered half the globe. We are only just beginning to map the corridors of this hidden empire, tracing the lines of descent like explorers navigating a darkened city with a single, flickering candle. The search for the Denisovans reminds us that the human story is largely composed of silence. For every bone we find, there are millions that have turned to dust. For every tool we uncover, there are countless songs, stories, and languages that have vanished into the air. The Denisovans represent the great unknown of our past. They are the embodiment of everything we have lost, and the promise of everything we have yet to discover. By identifying them through mathematics, we are reclaiming a piece of our collective soul that was almost erased passage of time. We are proving that no one is truly gone as long as their rhythm remains in the code of the living. In the quiet hours of the night, when we contemplate our place in the universe, it is grounding to think of the ghost tribe. They remind us that we are not the pinnacle of a lonely climb, but the current expression of an ancient, multi-voiced conversation. Our DNA is a library, and the Denisovans occupy a massive, previously uncatalogued wing. We are reading the titles of their books through the patterns of our own lives, learning the lessons they learned 100,000 years ago about how to endure, how to adapt, and how to persist. The silence of the fossil record is no longer an obstacle. It is a space for deeper reflection. We don't need a sprawling ruin to know that the Denisovans were here. We feel them in the way we survive the cold. We see them in the diversity of our faces. We hear them in the mathematical harmonies of our genomic sequences. They are the architecture of our endurance, the silent foundation upon which the modern world is built. Even without a face, their presence is undeniable, a digital echo that rings out across the millennia, reminding us that the past is never truly behind us. It is within us, waiting for the right moment to be understood. In the quiet, cold depths of the Denisova cave's history, among the layers of anonymous dust and generic stone tools, there exists a single, microscopic point of focus that makes the abstract science of genetics feel suddenly, piercingly human. In 2012, researchers identified a bone fragment so small it lacked any distinguishing anatomical features. It was simply a shard, barely 2 centimeters long. They cataloged it as Denisova 11. But to the world of science and the story of our origins, she has a much simpler, more intimate name: Denny. When the geneticists in Leipzig mapped her genome, they didn't just find another data point. They found a miracle of timing. Denny was a teenage girl, likely no older than 13 when she died, and she is the only person ever discovered who was a direct, first-generation hybrid. Her mother was a Neanderthal, and her father was a Denisovan. She is the living bridge, the undeniable proof that 40,000 years ago, the boundaries between human species were not walls, but porous veils that could be crossed in a single lifetime. To think of Denny is to move away from the cold classification of subspecies and into the warmth of a prehistoric family. Imagine the circumstances that led to her existence. Her mother's people, the Neanderthals, had their roots in the far west, in the rugged valleys of Europe. Her father's people, the Denisovans, were the masters of the east, the high plateaus, and the vast Siberian forests. For these two lineages to meet, someone had to undertake a journey of staggering proportions. The genetic data reveals that Denny's mother was more closely related to Neanderthals living in Western Europe than to those who had lived in the Altai cave earlier. This suggests a massive cross-continental migration, a trek across thousands of miles of frozen tundra and ancient rivers, driven perhaps by a changing climate or the simple, restless urge to see what lay beyond the next horizon. The meeting of these two groups was not an event in the way we record battles or treaties. It was likely a quiet intersection in the Altai wilderness. Perhaps it was a chance encounter at a shared hunting ground, or a moment of mutual survival during a particularly brutal winter. There is a deep, melancholic beauty in the reality of Denny's DNA. She carried 2 distinct histories in her cells, one of the sun setting over the Atlantic, and another of the sun rising over the Pacific. In her, the two great branches of the human family tree, which had been growing apart for hundreds of thousands of years, finally reached out and touched. She was the embodiment of a prehistoric diplomacy, a child born not of conflict, but of connection. The biological reality of Denny's life challenges our modern obsession with purity and categorization. We often speak of ancient humans as if they were different animals entirely, but Denny reminds us that they were people who recognized themselves in one another. When her father looked at her mother, he did not see a Neanderthal, a different species to be feared or avoided. He saw a partner. He saw someone who understood the language of the mountain, the smell of the coming snow, and the importance of the hearth. Their union tells us that the ghost tribe and the cave dwellers of the West shared a common emotional vocabulary. They were capable of love, of raising a child, and of building a life together in one of the harshest environments on the planet. As we look at the microscopic details of Denny's bones, we see a meditation on prehistoric migration. Her father's ancestry also showed traces of even older Neanderthal genes, meaning this wasn't the first time these two groups had met in the Altai. This region was a sanctuary of genetic blending, a place where the lineages of the earth could fold into one another. The Altai was a vast, open-air laboratory of human evolution, but for Denny, it was simply home. She likely grew up speaking a language that was a hybrid of her parents' tongues, learning the secrets of both the Neanderthal flint-knapping and the Denisovan craftsmanship. She was a child of two worlds, a pioneer of a future she would never see. The scale of her existence is a reminder of how much of our history is lost to the silence of the earth. If that tiny fragment of bone had been washed away by a spring flood, or if a cave hyena had found it first, we would never have known Denny existed. We would still be debating whether these groups ever truly met. Her life was a fragile spark, yet she carries the weight of an entire paradigm shift. She proves that our ancestors were not isolated islands, but part of a global, interconnected web of movement. They were far more mobile and far more social than we ever gave them credit for. They were travelers who carried their homes in their hearts and their histories in their blood. There is a profound sense of what if that surrounds Denny. What would her life have been like as she grew into adulthood? In a world where she was a bridge between two peoples, would she have been a leader, a storyteller, a weaver of different cultures? We only have the record of her youth, a snapshot of a life cut short at 13. But even in that brevity, she achieved a kind of biological immortality. She is the ancestor of no one, yet she is the sister of us all. She represents the moment the human story became a mosaic rather than a straight line. The Altai Mountains tonight are a tomb for millions of stories like Denny's. For every hybrid we find, there must have been thousands more whose bones have long since turned to dust, whose genetic signatures were eventually diluted into the sea of time. But Denny stands as a sentinel, a witness to the truth of our complexity. She tells us that we have always been a species of seekers, always looking for a way to bridge the gaps between us. The ghost tribe was not a separate entity. They were a part of a larger, shifting human consciousness that refused to be confined by the boundaries of biology. As we ponder the girl named Denny, we are forced to confront our own definitions of belonging. She was a Neanderthal Denisovan, a child of the mountains, a fragment of a lost world. Yet, when we look at her code, we see the same patterns of resilience and adaptation that define us today. She is a reminder that there is no such thing as a pure human. We are all, in some sense, hybrids, the product of ancient meetings, of migrations across forgotten landscapes, and of the enduring human capacity to find common ground in the dark. The stillness of the cave where she was found is not the silence of a void. It is the silence of a library. Denny is a single, precious volume in that collection, a story of a family that lived at the edge of the world. Her presence in the record is a gift from the cold Siberian earth, a chance for us to look back across 40,000 years and see not a mystery, but a face that looked like both of her parents, a face that belonged to the Altai, and a face that, in its own way, is reflected in the mirrors of the modern world. The blending of families across the frozen tundras was not an anomaly. It was the rhythm of life. It was how we survived. By sharing our genes, we shared our strengths, our immunities, and our dreams. Denny was the living proof that even in the harshest of times, the urge to connect was stronger than the urge to remain apart. She is a testament to the fact that our history is not written in stone, but in the living, breathing reality of those who came before us, and those who carry their legacy forward. As the images of the Siberian landscape fade into the soft gray of sleep, let the thought of Denny remain, a young girl who stood at the crossroads of human history, unaware that her very existence would one day change the way we understand ourselves. She is at rest now, cradled by the mountain that sheltered her people for so long, a silent guardian of the secrets that still flow in our veins. In the thin, crystalline air of the Tibetan plateau, the world exists on a different scale. At 4,000 meters above sea level, the atmosphere is a ghost of itself, containing 40% less oxygen than the air at the coast. For most humans, this roof of the world is a hostile frontier, where the heart labors and the blood thickens into a dangerous sludge in a desperate attempt to capture enough life-giving gas. Yet, for the Tibetans and the Sherpas, who have called these jagged heights home for millennia, the air is not an adversary. They move with a quiet, effortless grace through the death zone that would leave others gasping. For years, scientists viewed this as a miracle of rapid evolution, a sudden mutation that allowed a mountain-dwelling people to thrive where others withered. But the truth, revealed in the deep archives of our genetic code, is far more haunting. This remarkable ability was not a new invention. It was a gift, an alchemical legacy handed down from the Denisovans. To understand this gift, we must look at a specific fragment of DNA known as the EPAS1 gene, often referred to by biologists as the super athlete gene. In most humans, when oxygen levels drop, the EPAS1 gene triggers a frantic production of red blood cells. This is a short-term survival tactic, but at high altitudes, it becomes a liability. The blood becomes too viscous, leading to strokes, heart failure, and complications in pregnancy. However, the Tibetan version of this gene is different. It is a highly specialized variant that prevents the blood from thickening, allowing the body to use what little oxygen is available with surgical efficiency. When researchers first sequenced this variant, they were stunned to find that it didn't match anything in the Homo sapiens lineage. It was a perfect mirror image match for the DNA found in that tiny finger bone from the Siberian cave. This is what we might call the Alchemist's gift. It is a piece of biological technology forged in the crucible of the Denisovan experience. The Denisovans were the original masters of the high altitudes of Central Asia. Over hundreds of thousands of years, their bodies had adapted to the punishing, low-oxygen environments of the Altai and the Himalayas. They didn't just survive the height, they became part of it. When our own ancestors, the early Homo sapiens, migrated into these formidable landscapes, they were essentially ill-equipped travelers. They were entering a world that their biology was not prepared for. But through the intimate blending of the two species, the Denisovans passed on their survival kit. They gave us the genetic keys to the mountains, a legacy that has allowed human civilization to take root in the clouds. Imagine the prehistoric meeting that made this possible. It wasn't just an exchange of tools or stories. It was a transfer of resilience. When a Denisovan and an early modern human had a child together, that child inherited a superpower. In the harsh, selective environment of the high plateau, those who carried the Denisovan EPAS1 gene thrived, while those without it perished or were forced to descend to the lowlands. Over generations, the ghost DNA became the dominant signature of the region. The Denisovans themselves eventually faded from the physical world, but their solution to the problem of thin air remained. They are the reason a Sherpa can guide a climber up Everest. They are the invisible lungs of the Tibetan people. There is something deeply philosophical about this realization. We often think of evolution as a slow, agonizing process of trial and error, a lone species struggling against nature. But the story of the EPAS1 gene suggests that evolution can also be an act of inheritance. We didn't have to wait for a random mutation to save us from the thin air. We simply had to meet the right people. The Denisovans did the hard work of adaptation over hundreds of millennia, and through their generosity, or perhaps just the simple human reality of connection, they share the fruits of that labor with us. We are the beneficiaries of an ancient wisdom that is written in the very chemistry of our blood. The scale of this gift is purely objective, yet it feels like poetry. The Denisovans are a ghost tribe because we can't find their skeletons, yet they're the most visible part of the human story when we look at how we conquered the Earth's extremes. This is not a conspiracy theory or a myth. It is documented medical reality. When doctors study the health of Tibetan mothers and the high birth weights of their children at high altitudes, they are looking at the direct results of a Denisovan encounter that happened 40,000 years ago. The past is not a foreign country. It is a physiological presence. The Denisovans are not extinct in any meaningful sense if their biological innovations are still the primary reason millions of people can breathe today. This genetic transfer also tells us something about the geographical range of the Denisovans. To pass this gene to the ancestors of Tibetans, the ghost tribe must have occupied the Tibetan plateau long before we arrived. In 2019, the discovery of a Denisovan jawbone in the Xiahe cave in Gansu, China, confirmed this. The bone was found at an altitude of over 3,000 meters. These people were the true Highlanders, the lords of the thin air. They didn't just pass through the mountains, they were built by them. They understood the silence of the peaks and the rhythm of the high altitude. altitude seasons. Their alchemist's gift was a distilled essence of their entire existence, a biological summary of 100,000 years of mountain living. As we contemplate this, the distinction between human and environment begins to dissolve. We are shaped by the places we inhabit, but we are also shaped by the people who inhabited them before us. The Tibetans are not just adapted to the Himalayas, they are biologically linked to the Denisovans who were there first. This creates a chain of continuity that stretches back into the deep, dark mists of the Pleistocene. It reminds us that no population is an island. We are all a patchwork of whoever was here before, carrying their triumphs and their survival strategies in our very cells. The stillness of the high plateau tonight is the same stillness the Denisovans knew. The stars seem closer here, the wind more personal. When the oxygen is low and the heart beats a slow, steady rhythm, it is the Denisovan legacy that keeps the lights on in the brain and the heat in the limbs. It is a quiet, internal monument. While we search for their carvings on cave walls, they have left their most enduring signature in the way our lungs expand and our blood flows. They are the architects of our endurance, the silent partners in our most extreme adventures. The super athlete gene is just one example of what we have inherited, but it is perhaps the most profound. It represents a moment where two different kinds of humanity became one, not through conflict, but through a shared future. The Denisovans gave us the ability to inhabit the uninhabitable. They turned a barrier, the mountain, into a home. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, consider the air you breathe. Consider the silent, microscopic alchemy that allows your body to function, to heal, and to thrive. You are never truly alone in your own body. You are a vessel for the successes of those who came before you. The ghost tribe is still breathing. They are breathing through the lungs of the people on the roof of the world. They are moving through the mountain passes of the Altai and the deep valleys of the Himalayas. Their gift was not one of gold or stone, but of life itself, the ability to stand on the highest peaks of the world and look at the stars without gasping for breath. It is a legacy of resilience, a testament to a time when we weren't just one species, but a family of seekers, sharing the secrets of the earth so that some of us might endure to tell the story. The air remains cold, the mountains remain high, and the blood remains a river of memory. In the quiet, rhythmic pulse of the night, we can feel the weight of that inheritance. The alchemist's gift is not a relic of the past. It is the energy of the present, a steady, oxygenated flame that continues to burn in the hearts of millions, long after the fires in the Denisova cave have turned to ash. To understand the true scale of the ghost tribe, we must leave the frigid shadows of Siberia and the jagged heights of Tibet and turn our gaze toward the sweltering, sapphire blue waters of the Malay archipelago. There is a boundary in the ocean known as the Wallace Line, a deep water trench that separates the islands of Southeast Asia into two distinct biological worlds. To the west lies Asia, once connected by a land bridge called Sundaland. To the east lies Wallacea and the ancient continent of Sahul, which we now know as Australia, New Guinea, and the surrounding islands. For millions of years, this line was an insurmountable barrier for most land animals. Even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age, the waters remained deep and the currents treacherous. Yet, when we look at the genetic map we find a shocking anomaly. The highest concentration of Denisovan DNA on the planet is not found in the Altai Mountains where their bones were discovered. It is found thousands of miles to the south, in the indigenous peoples of the Philippines, Melanesia, and the Aboriginal populations of Australia. This discovery suggests a vast, hidden empire that mastered environments we never associated with the cave people of the north. We are tracking an invisible trail through the steam of tropical jungles and across the white sands of remote archipelagos. In the Aita Magbukun people of the Philippines, nearly 5% of their entire genome is Denisovan, a level of ancestry that rivals the Neanderthal heritage found in Europeans. This isn't just a trace, it is a profound biological foundation. It forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about Denisovan geography. They were not just a cold, adapted mountain people. They were a maritime power, a lineage of explorers who somehow crossed the Wallace line long before our own ancestors arrived. They were the first humans to truly conquer the deep water gaps of the Pacific, flourishing in the heat and humidity of the tropics just as easily as they had survived the Siberian frost. Imagine the sheer adaptability required for such a migration. To move from the sub-zero limestone chambers of the Altai to the coral reefs of Oceania is a transition that would take most species millions of years. But the Denisovans were masters of the micro to macro. They adapted their tools, their diets, and their very biology to every landscape they touched. In the rainforests of Sundaland, they would have encountered a world of vibrant green, teeming with giant monitor lizards, pygmy elephants, and birds of paradise. They traded the fur of the cave lion for the fibers of tropical vines. They learned the rhythms of the monsoons and the secrets of the mangrove swamps. The Ghost Tribe was a chameleon population, shifting their identity to match the soil beneath their feet, leaving behind a legacy of survival that would eventually be passed into the blood of the seafarers who followed them. The mystery of how they crossed the Wallace line remains one of the most fascinating, silent chapters of our history. Did they build rafts of bamboo, lashed together with jungle creepers, to navigate the churning straits between Bali and Lombok? Or did they possess a seafaring capability that we have yet to find in the archaeological record? The genetic data is objective and unyielding. They made it across. They were in Sahul, the great southern continent, long enough and in numbers great enough to leave a permanent mark on the DNA of the first Australians. This suggests that the Ghost Tribe was not a small, isolated group of cave dwellers, but a massive, successful human radiation that once dominated more than half the globe. They were the true kings of the East, holding a territory that stretched from the Arctic Circle to the southern reaches of the Pacific. As we trace this southern migration, the tone of the story shifts from the melancholic cold of the north to the vibrant, rhythmic pulse of the islands. There's a sense of awe in realizing that these archaic humans were perhaps the world's first true deep-sea voyagers. While our ancestors were still navigating the savannas of Africa, the Denisovans were already listening to the roar of the Pacific surf. They were a civilization of diversity, likely speaking different dialects and possessing different physical traits, depending on whether they lived in the mountains or on the coast. In the Philippines alone, researchers suspect There may have been at least two distinct groups of Denisovans, a northern and a southern branch, who had been separated for thousands of years before they met the migrating Homo sapiens. This southern legacy is not just a historical curiosity. It is a living shield, much like the EPAS1 gene gave the Tibetans the ability to breathe in the mountains. The Denisovan DNA, found in the people of Melanesia and Australia, includes crucial immune system adaptations. These HLA genes, human leukocyte antigens, act as a biological memory bank, helping the body recognize and attack pathogens. By interbreeding with the Denisovans, who had already spent thousands of years adapting to the unique diseases of the tropical East, our ancestors borrowed a pre-made immune system. It was an evolutionary shortcut that allowed modern humans to survive the move into New Guinea and Australia without being wiped out by local viruses. The Ghost Tribe provided the biological armor that allowed the colonization of the Pacific to succeed. There is a profound, grounded reality in this exchange. We often frame the story of human migration as a conquest, but the DNA tells a story of cooperation and integration. The Denisovans didn't just step aside, they became the bridge. They provided the local knowledge, encoded in their very cells, that made life possible in these new, beautiful, yet hostile environments. When we look at the intricate cultures of the Pacific today, the master navigators, the deep sea divers, the guardians of the rainforest, we are looking at a heritage that is partly forged in the fires of a much older humanity. The Ghost Tribe is not a myth. They are the silent partners in the exploration of the world's largest ocean. The stillness of a tropical night on a remote island in Wallacea carries a different kind of memory than the caves of Siberia. Here, the air is heavy with moisture and the sound of 1,000 nocturnal insects. The stars are reflected in the calm, dark waters of the lagoon. It was here, on shores like these, that the two lineages met. It wasn't just a meeting of people, but a meeting of histories. The Denisovans, with their long-honed knowledge of the island world, and the Sapiens, with their restless westward drive. In the blending of their families, they ensured that the essence of the Denisovan experience, their mastery of the sea and the jungle, would never truly vanish. The scale of this southern Denisovan presence is so large that it challenges our terminology. To call them a subspecies or a side branch feels inadequate. For tens of thousands of years, they were the dominant human presence in Asia and Oceania. We are the newcomers. We are the ones who walked into their world and found it already mapped, already named, and already inhabited. The fact that we find so few of their bones in the tropics is simply a matter of chemistry. The acidic soil of the rainforest and the heat of the islands consume bone with terrifying speed. But the DNA is the ultimate preservation, a high-fidelity record that no amount of tropical rain can wash away. As we contemplate the crossing of the Wallace line, we are forced to look at the map of human history with new eyes. We see a world that was once a vibrant tapestry of different ways of being human. The Denisovans were the masters of the vast middle ground between the civilizations of the West and the mysteries of the deep Pacific. They were the ones who proved that humans could thrive anywhere, from the edge of an ice sheet to the heart of a volcano-studded archipelago. Their story is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human form in all its varieties. they took is now mostly underwater, buried by the rising seas at the end of the last ice age. The land bridges they walked are now seafloors, and the caves they once inhabited are now submerged grottos. But the trail they left in our blood remains above the waves. It is a trail of endurance, of curiosity, and of the undeniable urge to see what lies across the water. The Ghost Tribe were the original voyagers, the first to hear the call of the horizon and answer it with the strength of their own hands and the resilience of their own hearts. In the quiet, rhythmic wash of the tide against the shore, there is an echo of that ancient crossing. The water that separates the islands today is the same water they looked upon 50,000 years ago. And as we drift further into the history of these people, we realize that the Wallace line was never a wall for them. It was a doorway. And through that doorway, they carried a piece of themselves that still lives in the laughter, the strength, and the survival of millions of people across the great blue expanse of the Pacific. They are not gone. They have simply changed their form. Flowing like the currents between the islands, they were the first to call home. Deep within the 11th layer of the Denisova cave, resting in the same chronological silt as the girl with the pinky bone, archaeologists uncovered an object that defied every preconceived notion of prehistoric capability. It was not a tool for killing, nor a vessel for cooking. It was a fragment of a bracelet, carved from a rare, translucent chlorite that shimmered with a deep emerald hue. This master of the greenstone did not merely shape the rock. They understood its soul. When the light hits the polished surface of this artifact, it reveals a level of technical sophistication that seems to belong to a much later era, perhaps the Neolithic or even the Bronze Age. Yet, this bracelet was crafted at least 40,000 years ago. It features a hole drilled with such precision and speed that it could only have been achieved with a high-rotation stable drill, a piece of machinery we once thought was the exclusive invention of Homo sapiens. Tens of thousands of years later, the existence of this jewelry forces a profound shift in our perspective. The Denisovans were not merely survivors of the cold. They were artists of the highest order, possessing a cognitive sensitivity and a mastery of physics that challenges our definition of primitive. The chlorite itself is a testament to a sophisticated economy of beauty. This specific stone is not found in the immediate vicinity of the cave. The nearest known source is nearly 200 kilometers away. This means the artisan or the community they belong to valued the aesthetic properties of this green mineral enough to organize its transport across a vast, predator-filled wilderness. The stone was not chosen for its hardness or its utility as a weapon, but for its play with light. In the flickering glow of a cave fire, the bracelet would have transformed from a dark, opaque band into a glowing ring of trapped forest light. To the Denisovans, the green stone was a medium for expression, a way to signal status, identity, or perhaps a connection to the mountain itself. The effort required to transport, cut, and polish such a brittle material suggests a society that had moved far beyond the immediate concerns of calories and shelter. They had time for elegance. The drilling of the hole is the most jarring detail for modern science. Analysis of the wear patterns indicates that the drill bit rotated at such a high velocity that it created a perfectly smooth, circular aperture, likely intended to hold a leather strap or a pendant. This was wasn't the work of a hand-turned stick. It required a level of mechanical engineering, perhaps a bow drill or a weighted spindle, that implies a deep understanding of friction and rotational force. The artisan even accounted for the fragility of the chlorite, applying varying degrees of pressure to avoid shattering the stone. This is cognitive sophistication in its purest form. It is the ability to envision a finished, decorative object, and then invent the specific mechanical means to bring it into the physical world. The ghost tribe was thinking in 3 dimensions, solving complex engineering problems, while the rest of the world was still perfecting the basic flint knife. There is a quiet, objective beauty in the realization that the Denisovans possessed an artistic eye. We often fall into the trap of thinking that creativity is a trait that appeared suddenly with the arrival of modern humans, like a light switch being flipped on in the brain. But the green stone bracelet tells us that the impulse to decorate, to symbolize, and to craft was a shared human heritage. The Denisovans looked at the natural world not just as a source of meat and fur, but as a source of raw materials for the imagination. They saw the potential in a dull piece of chlorite and spent hundreds of hours grinding it against leather and sand until it reached a mirror-like finish. This dedication to craft is a form of meditation, a rhythmic devotion to an ideal of beauty that existed in their minds long before it existed in their hands. This shift in our understanding of their intelligence changes the way we view their interactions with our own ancestors. When Homo sapiens first encountered the Denisovans in the forests of Asia, they didn't find a group of ape-like creatures huddling in the dark. They likely found a people wearing sophisticated jewelry, using advanced bone needles to sew tailored clothing, and perhaps even playing musical instruments that have since rotted away. The ghost tribe may have been the cultural mentors of the East. The exchange of DNA was likely accompanied by an exchange of ideas, technologies, and aesthetics. We didn't just inherit their genes, we may have inherited their sparks of innovation. The artistic sensitivity we celebrate in our own history may have roots that are far older and more diverse than we ever imagined. The technical mastery of the greenstone also suggests a stable, long-term social structure. You do not develop high-rotation drills and specialized polishing techniques in a culture that is constantly on the brink of starvation. The Denisovans of the Altai must have had a predictable, successful way of life that allowed for the specialization of labor. They were likely master craftsmen, individuals whose primary role was not hunting, but the creation of symbolic objects. This implies a hierarchy, a system of apprenticeship, and a shared language of symbols. The bracelet was a social tool, a way of communicating meaning across distances and generations. It tells us that the Denisovan world was a world of stories, where a piece of jewelry could hold the history of a family or the status of a leader. As we look at the microscopic scratches on the surface of the chlorite, we see the traces of a human hand that lived and worked 40,000 years ago. The artisan even made a mistake, a small crack that they carefully polished over to hide. This tiny imperfection is perhaps the most moving detail of all. It makes the master of the greenstone feel real, tangible, and fallible. They were striving for perfection in a world of stone and ice. They were pushing the limits of their materials experimenting with new ways to make the world more beautiful. The bracelet is a bridge of empathy. We know what it is to want to create something that lasts, to leave a mark that says, "I was here, and I saw something beautiful." The silence of the Denisova cave today is a repository for these lost innovations. For every bracelet that survived, there were likely thousands of carvings in wood, bone, and antler that have vanished. We are looking at the 1% of their culture that was made of stone. If they could achieve this level of precision with chlorite, what were they doing with softer materials? Their world may have been filled with color, texture, and music. The Ghost Tribe wasn't a shadow. They were a vibrant, creative force that shaped the cultural landscape of ancient Asia. They were the innovators who first mastered the high-speed drill, the first to see the emerald hidden inside the gray rock. The objective reality of the green stone bracelet shatters the textbook myth of a singular, superior human mind. Intelligence and creativity are not the property of one species. They are the natural blooming of the human potential, appearing wherever there is enough stability and curiosity to allow them to grow. The Denisovans were our cognitive equals, peers in the grand experiment of consciousness. They looked at the same moon, felt the same grief, and possessed the same drive to create. The bracelet is not just a piece of jewelry. It is a manifesto of their humanity. As the night deepens and the world of the Altai Mountains fades into the dark, let the image of the green stone linger in your mind. Think of the artisan sitting by the fire, the steady hum of the drill, the fine dust of chlorite settling on their hands. They were not primitive. They were precise. They were not other. They were us, expressed in a different lineage. The beauty they created has outlasted their language, their names, and their physical form. It remains as a silent witness to a time when the mountains were home to masters of stone and light. The legacy of the Ghost Tribe is written in the blood of Tibetans and the lungs of Melanesians, but it is also written in the polished surface of that emerald band. It is a reminder that we are part of a very old, very clever family. We are the descendants of artists and engineers who were solving the mysteries of the earth long before the first word of history was ever written. The green stone is a compass, pointing us back to a truth we nearly forgot, that the past was never empty. It was always full of light, always full of hands reaching out to shape the world into something more than just a place to survive. The artisan has been gone for 40 millennia, but the light they captured in the chlorite still shines. It is a steady, emerald glow that pierces through the fog of time, reminding us that the spirit of invention is as old as the human heart itself. In the quiet, rhythmic cycle of the earth, the green stone remains, a fragment of a dream, a piece of the past that refused to stay buried, a testament to the masters who saw the beauty in the dust and the emerald in the mountain. As you drift further into the stillness, you can almost hear the soft, rhythmic grinding of stone against stone, a sound that has echoed through the valleys of the Altai for an eternity. The work is finished now. The bracelet is complete. The master can rest, and so can you, as the images of the green stone fade into the soft, velvet dark of the night. When our ancestors first crossed the invisible thresholds from the sun-drenched savannas of Africa into the deep, ancient forests of Eurasia, they were not just entering a new landscape. They were entering a biological war zone. Every new valley, every mountain range, and every humid river delta was teeming with microscopic adversaries, viruses, bacteria, and parasites that the human immune system had never encountered. In the unforgiving logic of natural selection, a single novel fever could have extinguished the entire pioneering line of Homo sapiens. Yet, we did not perish. We thrived. And the reason for our survival is not found in the tools we carried, but in the biological shield we inherited from the people who were already there. As our ancestors encountered the Denisovans, they didn't just share fire and stories. They shared their most potent survival mechanism, their HLA genes, the human leukocyte antigen system, or HLA, is the commander-in-chief of your immune system. These genes produce proteins that sit on the surface of your cells, like tiny biological sentries, tasked with identifying self from non-self. When a virus enters your body, these sentries recognize the foreign invader and sound the alarm, summoning the white blood cells to attack. But these sentries must be trained. For hundreds of thousands of years, while our ancestors were adapting to African pathogens, the Denisovans were in the East, engaged in a relentless, microscopic arms race with the diseases of the Asian continent. Their immune systems had been forged in the crucible of the Siberian frost and the tropical heat of Sunderland. They had already developed the keys to the locks of thousands of local pathogens. When the two groups met and interbred, something extraordinary happened. In the language of genetics, this is called adaptive introgression. Instead of waiting tens of thousands of years for a lucky mutation to provide resistance to a new local flu, our ancestors essentially downloaded a pre-built high-performance immune system from the Denisovans. A single encounter could grant the next generation a suite of antibodies that would have otherwise taken an eternity to evolve. This was an evolutionary shortcut of staggering proportions. Today, researchers have found that certain HLA variants in modern Asian and Oceanian populations are almost entirely Denisovan in origin. We are walking through the modern world, protected by a shield that was forged in the bodies of a ghost tribe 40 millennia ago. Imagine the reality of those early migrations. A small band of modern humans moves into a new territory. They are exhausted. Their numbers are thinning, and they are being picked off by diseases they don't understand. Then they meet a group of Denisovans. These people are robust. They are healthy. They are in harmony with the local environment. Through the union of these two peoples, the children born into that band are suddenly more resilient. They are the ones who survive the seasonal fevers. They are the ones who live long enough to become ancestors. The ghost DNA was not just a passenger in our genome. It was the engine of our expansion. We didn't conquer the globe through strength alone. We conquered it by becoming a mosaic of those who came before us. There is a profound, grounded reality to this biological transfer. It reminds us that purity is an evolutionary dead end. If our ancestors had remained genetically isolated, they likely would have been wiped out by the first exotic pathogen they encountered in the East. Instead, they were genetically promiscuous, and that was their greatest strength. The Denisovans provided the library of survival. We are the beneficiaries of an ancient health insurance policy, a biological legacy that continues to protect us today. When your body fights off a cold or recognizes a new strain of the flu, there is a statistical chance that the instructions for that defense were written in the Altai Mountains or the jungles of Wallacea long before the first city was ever built. This shield, however, is a double-edged sword. Evolution is always a trade-off. Some of the same Denisovan genes that once protected our ancestors from ancient plagues have been linked in modern medical studies to certain autoimmune responses, the very same aggressive immune system that was necessary to survive a world of cave hyenas and raw meat can, in the sterile environment of the 21st century, sometimes turn on the body itself. We are still living with the echoes of that prehistoric survival strategy. Our bodies are tuned for a world that no longer exists, a high-stakes world where the immune system had to be a hair-trigger weapon. To understand modern medicine, we must first understand the Denisovan ghost that still patrols our veins. The scale of this realization shifts the perspective from the macro history of civilizations to the intimate history of our own cells. We often think of ourself as something contained within our skin, but we are actually a collaborative effort. We are a vessel for the successes of a dozen different lineages. The Denisovans were the biological scouts, the ones who went ahead and tested the waters, suffering through the infections and the parasites so that we wouldn't have to. They paid for our immunity in a currency of struggle and adaptation. The ghost tribe is not a separate entity we are studying. They are the very reason we are capable of being the ones who study. As the night air grows still and the sounds of the modern world fade away, consider the complexity of your own internal architecture. You are protected by an invisible lattice of genetic memory. Within you is a biological shield that has been passed from hand to hand, from heart to heart, across the vastness of the Pleistocene. The Denisovans are there, in the quiet surveillance of your white blood cells, in the specific shape of your HLA proteins, and in the resilience of your skin and marrow. They are the silent sentries who never left their posts. This legacy of immunity also reveals the geographical footprint of the Denisovans. By tracing where these specific HLA variants are most common today, we can map the areas where the Denisovans were most successful. We see their shield most prominently in the populations of New Guinea and the indigenous people of the Philippines. It suggests that the ghost tribe was particularly well adapted to the high pathogen environments of the tropics. They were the masters of the green hell, the people who turned the most hostile jungles into a home. When our ancestors arrived in those humid, teeming landscapes, the Denisovans were the ones who held the door open, offering the genetic keys to a world that would have otherwise been a graveyard. The objective beauty of this story lies in its lack of melodrama. It wasn't a heroic sacrifice. It was the simple, messy, and beautiful reality of human life. People lived together, they had children, and they survived. In doing so, they created a lineage that was stronger than the sum of its parts. The biological shield is the ultimate proof of our shared humanity. It tells us that 40,000 years ago, the differences between us and them were secondary to the fundamental human drive to endure. We are a species of survivors, but we didn't do it alone. The silence of the deep past is not a void. It is a resonance. We hear the Denisovans in the way we heal. We feel them in the strength of our response to the world's hidden dangers. They are the architects of our health, the silent partners in our ongoing struggle against the invisible. While their temples and their names have vanished, their defense systems are still operating at peak efficiency in the bodies of billions of people. As you drift toward the edge of consciousness, let the thought of this ancient protection bring a sense of grounded peace. You are the product of 1,000,000 successful defenses. You are carrying a shield that has survived ice ages, migrations, and the rise and fall of countless empires. The ghost tribe is with you in the dark, a quiet, cellular presence that ensures that even when you are asleep, the watchmen of your body are awake, guarding the legacy of a lineage that refused to be forgotten. The blood in your veins is a river of ancient victories, and the Denisovans are the current that keeps it moving forward. The world did not end with a scream. It ended with a slow, crystalline breath that lasted for 10,000 years as we move into the era known as the last glacial maximum, roughly 25,000 years ago. The planet underwent a transformation so profound, it felt like the very Earth was retracting its permission for life. The Great Cooling was not an overnight freeze, but a relentless, creeping expansion of the White Death. From the poles and the high peaks, the ice sheets stretched their frozen fingers southward, locking the world's water into towering walls of blue-white glass. In Siberia, the Altai Mountains became an altar of frost. The forests that once provided cover and carbon-rich fuel retreated, replaced by a brutal, treeless mammoth steppe, where the wind could reach speeds that would strip the skin from a man's face. For the Denisovans, who had mastered this rugged terrain for nearly 300 millennia, the environment was no longer a challenging home. It was becoming a desert. The environmental pressures of this era created a paradox of geography. As the glaciers grew, the sea levels plummeted, exposing vast stretches of land that are today buried under the ocean. You could walk from the coast of Vietnam to the edge of Borneo. You could cross from New Guinea into the heart of Australia without ever getting your feet wet. But while the map was expanding, the habitable zones were shrinking. The ghost tribe found themselves squeezed into fragmented refuges, isolated by mountain ranges that had become impassable walls of ice, and valleys that had become wind tunnels of permafrost. In the north, the Siberian populations began to thin. The genetic record shows a narrowing of the gene pool, a biological bottleneck, where the diversity that had sustained them for ages began to evaporate. They were becoming a people of islands, not just in the ocean, but islands of warmth in a sea of cold. The struggle for survival during the Great Cooling was written in the scarcity of the landscape. The massive herds of megafauna, the woolly rhinoceros, the steppe bison, the giant elk, were moving, their migratory paths dictated by the shifting snows. To follow the food meant leaving the ancestral caves. To stay meant starvation. In the silence of the Altai, the fires in the Denisova cave grew smaller. The demographic decline of the Denisovans was not the result of a sudden catastrophe, a volcanic eruption, or a great war. It was the slow, melancholic arithmetic of a world that was becoming too expensive to live in. Every harsh winter that lasted a month too long, every spring that failed to bring the meltwater, whittled away at their numbers. A species that had once spanned an entire continent was being reduced to small, disconnected bands, wandering through the white haze of a dying world. The shift in global temperature did more than just change the weather. It changed the human hierarchy. While the Denisovans were struggling in their traditional strongholds, a new player, Homo sapiens, was proving to be remarkably resilient. Our ancestors were the ultimate generalists, possessing a social structure and a toolkit that allowed them to adapt to the changing world with a frantic, inventive energy. As we moved into the shrinking territories of the Denisovans, we didn't necessarily arrive as conquerors. The reality was likely much more quiet and much more intimate. We were looking for the same things: a cave that held the heat, a river that hadn't frozen to the bottom, and a community that could ensure the survival of the next generation. There is a profound sadness in the genetic concept of absorption. We often speak of extinction as a total erasure, a flame being blown out in the dark. But for the Denisovans, the end was a slow blending. As their own populations dwindled, the arrival of modern humans offered a different kind of survival. When a small group of Denisovans encountered a larger group of Homo sapiens, the biological imperative to persist outweighed the need for tribal purity. They didn't die out through violence. They were loved out of existence. They traded their distinct identity for a place in the future. They folded their history, their immunities, and their unique adaptations into the rising tide of the modern human expansion. The last pure Denisovan likely died not in a lonely cave, but in the heart of a hybrid family, surrounded by children whose eyes and skin were a mix of two worlds. The southern branches of the ghost tribe, those living in the tropical reaches of Sundaland and Sahul, faced a different kind of cooling. While they didn't have to contend with the ice sheets, the drop in global temperatures altered the monsoons and the distribution of the rainforests. The vast land bridges that had allowed them to dominate Southeast Asia were now being used by waves of migrating modern humans. The Denisovans of the South, the masters of the islands, found themselves increasingly outnumbered. The genetic data suggests that the interbreeding in these regions was even more extensive than in the north. In the humid, sun-dappled forests of New Guinea and the Philippines, the Denisovan signal didn't just linger. It became a permanent foundation of the local population. They surrendered their name to the forest, but they kept their presence in the blood. The narrowing of the gene pool is a process that scientists can track with clinical precision, yet it carries a weight that feels deeply personal. We see the loss of unique genetic variants, the extinction of specific maternal lineages that had existed since before the first mammoth was ever hunted. It is like watching a library burn, one book at a time, until only a few cherished volumes remain. By the time the world began to warm again, nearly 12,000 years ago, the Denisovans, as a distinct, recognizable species, were gone. The ice had retreated. The sea levels had risen to swallow their coastal paths, and the ghost tribe had completed its transformation into a memory. The Great Cooling was the ultimate filter of history. It stripped away everything that was not essential. It forced the various human lineages to confront the reality that they were more alike than they were different. In the face of a planet that had turned cold and indifferent, the only way to survive was to join forces. The Denisovans were the masters of the old world, the guardians of the mountains, and the islands who had held the line for 300,000 years. But the new world belonged to the hybrids. It belonged to the children of the Altai and the children of the Pacific, who carried the Denisovan shield and the sapiens' spirit. The Altai Mountains today are a testament to this slow fading. When you walk through the valleys, you are walking through a landscape that once teemed with a different kind of human life. The silence is not empty. It is the silence of a long, slow departure. The Denisovans didn't leave behind grand ruins or written records because they didn't need them. Their legacy was more durable than stone. They left it in us. They entrusted their survival to the very people who would eventually replace them. It is a form of trust that is difficult for our modern, tribal minds to comprehend. A biological surrender that ensured that even as their species faded, their essence would remain part of the global human story. The objective reality of the last glacial maximum is a story of planetary change, but the human reality is a story of transition. The ghost tribe was not defeated by the ice. They were transformed by it. They were pushed to the edge of the world and the edge of their own biology, and they chose to cross over. They chose to become us. The cooling of the earth was the catalyst for the ultimate unification of the human family. It was the moment we stopped being separate species and started being a single, complex, and beautiful mosaic. The time of the Denisovans ended as the ice began to melt. But the meltwater didn't just wash away their footprints. It carried their legacy into the rivers and the oceans, into the valleys and the plains where modern civilization would eventually rise. They are the foundation upon which the post-glacial world was built. As the world warmed and the forests returned, the ghost tribe was already there, hidden in the DNA of the people who were reclaiming the land. They were the silent pioneers of the new era, the ones who had already been through the dark and the cold and had come out the other side. There is a quiet, rhythmic persistence in the way the earth cycles through its ages. The ice comes and the ice goes, and through it all, the thread of life continues to weave its way through the centuries. The Denisovans are a crucial part of that thread, a strong, resilient strand that was almost lost to the cold, but was saved by the warmth of human connection. They are a reminder that even in the darkest and coldest of times, there is a way forward, even if it means becoming something entirely new. The mountains remain, the river continues to flow, and the dust in the cave continues to settle. The story of the Great Cooling is a story of endurance, not the endurance of a single name or a single tribe, but the endurance of the human spirit in all its forms. The Denisovans are gone from the surface of the earth, but they are not gone from the earth itself. They have simply found a more permanent way to stay, tucked away in the deep, quiet corners of our own existence, waiting to be remembered by the very people they helped to create. The past is a vast, cooling landscape, and we are the ones who are left to walk through it, carrying the warmth of those who were here before us. We are the survivors of the long winter, and the ghost tribe is the light that helped us find our way to the dawn. The DNA helix is not merely a biological instruction manual. It is the most sophisticated, enduring archive ever created. Within its twisting ladders of nitrogenous bases, there are no erasures, only layers. Every breath you take is supported by a library that is millions of years old, and within that library, the Denisovans occupy a massive, previously uncatalogued wing. We have spent these hours tracing their journey from the sub-zero silts of the Altai Mountains to the sun-bleached shores of the Pacific. But the most profound realization is that the journey never actually ended. We are not looking back at the Denisovans across a chasm of time. We are looking at them in the mirror. They are the living museum that walks beside us, peering out through the eyes of a Sherpa on a Himalayan ridge, moving through the blood of a fisherman in the Solomon Islands, and shaping the very immune systems that protect us from the unseen dangers of our modern world. There is a blurring of the past into the present that occurs when you realize your own body is a vessel for ghosts. The Denisovans never truly left. They simply changed their state of being. They moved from the physical world of bone and stone into the informational world of the genome. This shift represents a form of immortality that no monument of granite could ever achieve. While the pyramids of Giza crumble and the great cities of the Silk Road are reclaimed by the desert, the Denisovan legacy remains as vibrant and functional as it was 40,000 years ago. It is a biological continuity that defies the traditional boundaries of life and death. When we study the ghost tribe, we are not performing an autopsy on a dead species. We are conducting a census of our own hidden selves. The understanding of this shared identity brings a quiet, philosophical detachment to our view of history. We no longer see the story of humanity as a series of replacements, one group arriving and another vanishing, but as a continuous, flowing river. The Denisovans provided the currents, the minerals, and the depth that allowed the river of Homo sapiens to reach the furthest corners of the globe. They are the silent partners in our greatest achievements. We didn't win the race for the planet. We inherited the strength to run it from those who were here before us. This is the grounded reality of our existence. We are a composite, a masterpiece of ancient collaborations, a living testament to the fact that connection is the most powerful survival strategy in the universe. The Ghost Tribe reminds us that we are never truly alone, even in the deepest silence of the night. Their story is a shield against the loneliness of our modern singular identity. We carry the Altai wind in our lungs and the Pacific currents in our veins. We are the guardians of a history that was almost lost, but which refused to stay buried in the dust. As we look into the future, we do so with a combined experience of multiple human lineages, all working together within ourselves to ensure that the story continues. The past is not behind us. It is the very fabric of our present, a rhythmic, chemical pulse that keeps us moving forward into the unknown. As you let the images of the Siberian caves and the tropical islands fade, consider the immense weight of time that is resting within you. You are the culmination of a staggering number of successful lives. Every one of your ancestors, Sapiens, Neanderthal, and Denisovan, lived long enough, fought hard enough, and loved deeply enough to pass the flame of life to the next generation. You are the living museum of their triumphs. You don't need to remember the dates or the names of the caves. You don't need to hold onto the maps or the scientific terminology. All of that can drift away now. The information has served its purpose. The mystery has been explored, and the ghosts have been acknowledged. Let the details of the EPAS1 gene and the green stone bracelet dissolve into the soft, velvet gray of your consciousness. You can let the images of the Wallace line and the Altai peaks lose their sharp edges, melting into a single, peaceful horizon. The past is safe. It is tucked away in the deep archives of your blood, and it doesn't require your attention anymore. You have done the work of remembering, and now you can do the work of releasing. You don't need to remember anything at all. The DNA will keep its own records. The cells will continue their silent work without your help. You can let go of the need to understand, the need to categorize, and the need to know. The story of the ghost tribe is now a part of you, a quiet hum in the background of your existence that will still be there when you wake. But for now, that hum is a lullaby, a slow, rhythmic vibration that is pulling you deeper into the stillness. If you're still awake and you've enjoyed drifting through this piece of the past, you can gently tap the like button or subscribe. But for now, you don't need to do anything at all. The mountains are sleeping, the caves are silent, the river of memory has reached the sea, and the water is calm. The ancestors are at rest, and so are you. Rest well. Good night.